to you?
How I got into trance work. Honestly, the my first experience, or at least my first conscious experience with trance work, um, was, well, I have to give you a little bit of background. I was
Please.
probably 12 or 13, and I was very interested in the occult. My mother was a recovering Catholic, so that was not something to share. I got tarot cards clandestinely, and eventually I started saving up my lunch money. Instead of buying lunch, I would save it up, and then I one day after school, I took it all and I went to Mervin's, which it doesn't exist anymore, but for old people like me who remember Mervin's, it was like a department store that had like basically everything. It was basically like a Target, kinda almost, not quite. And but they had, clothes and toiletries and housewares and Ouija boards. And so I bought a Ouija board, and I used it by myself, even though everybody said, "Oh, never do it by yourself." But I did because I had no one to do it with. And I found out fairly quickly that by doing it, I was falling into trance. I had an experience where I lost maybe about 4 hours. I was sitting on the couch and I was doing the board. I didn't know what I was doing, and I just tranced out. The next thing I knew, I was slowly waking up from trance, and I realized I had been bobbing my head like up and down, like just nodding my head for who knows how long. And then when I finally came into full consciousness, I was like, I just lost 4 hours. I knew I didn't fall asleep. I mean, I was sitting upright, and then that nodding my head thing was weird. But it was what taught me how easy it was for me to slip into altered states of awareness. And so that was really for me the beginning of my trance exploration. I know that after that, I had been led through various trances, like meditation CDs and things of that. Although probably way back then it wasn't CDs, was it? It would have been cassettes. I'm
Yeah.
really dating myself now. But yeah, I just became fascinated with it, and then I started just experimenting. In my first actual coven, which was me and a couple other young women, we would just experiment, and I realized that I was pretty good at getting other people into trance states. And so I just started, I had a certain confidence about that. It was like, oh, that's my superpower, right? Oh, I can lead people into trance states. So it kind of just all started, growing organically from there. I want to say maybe it was, God, 2005 or maybe 2007. I don't even remember. I was invited to take part in what we called fairy camps, or fairy retreats for Anderson fairy tradition. And this, I was accompanied with Thorn Coyle, who actually organized them, Anar, who's the grandmaster of the fairy tradition, Michelle Jackson was one of the people, Karina Blackheart. And so we all got together and kind of did a rotating teacher thing. And I found myself leading larger groups now than I could just at my store, and that really also taught me that this was something that I really needed to be doing. And people kept giving me good feedback about my voice and wanting me to record meditations. And I'm only really just now, I mean, I've kind of recorded a couple. Obviously, you guys came to the Witch's Sabbath this time, and I had a trance journey that I recorded, for leading people to the Sabbath. But there's a lot more coming because a lot of people have been asking me over the years, and I've just been the typical Pisces. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. I'll work on it a little bit. And oh, shiny thing over here. I'm going to go do that now and whatever. So maybe my productivity has not been the best, but I'm getting there. I'm getting a little bit more organized in my old age. So, but that's kind of like my history with trance. I love trance. It's something that anybody can do. In fact, anybody and everyone does it all the time anyway. It's just really about learning how to be conscious of those shifts and those trance states, and then being able to use it for something. But if you're watching TV, you're already in a trance. If you're driving your car on a route that you are quite familiar with, you're already in trance. In fact, I can't tell you how many times I've actually missed my exit when I've just been trancing out, like looking at the moon or whatever. I'm like, wait a second, where am I now? I've totally driven. Like, how is that possible that I drove into a place that I don't even know and wasn't aware of it until it was too late? That's happened to me a few times. I'm only slightly embarrassed to admit.
I'm
Um,
taking
But yeah, so trance is just something that I love, and it's something that I also feel is kind of at the foundational um, level, of our cultism, of our craft. We have to learn how to engage trance states in some form.
I'm so glad you lined it up like that, Storm. That you just jogged like a dozen different things in my brain. But it is this idea of trance states. And when you said that about driving the car, that made me connect some dots with some of the kind of like Mothman style reports where people say they're driving and go missing for time. And it's a question to me about what does trance states allow our mind to do really? Like you said, when we can kind of control of it and really lean into it, when we start acknowledging what's happening, what sort of magic does that unlock? And that's why I wanted to ask you just randomly off the cuff about what got you in to trance states. I'm so happy to hear that there was like a Ouija board, spirit board sort of connection in there. But you start off these two witches Sabbats with those great trance states, like you said. And I think that's absolutely magical because, like it was said when it was being queued up and as it was playing, we're taking people from their homes virtually to a spiritual gather sort of place where we're all interconnected in this way. And you setting the stage for that, you giving us that big trance on a Friday and then taking us home on a Sunday, I think that's absolutely special. And I'm so glad that you guys have that at the start of the Sabbats.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it just made sense because, I mean, obviously that's the same thing is happening when you're having an in-person gathering, when we would go and do those fairy retreats that I mentioned, we're kind of, our opening ritual is all about kind of setting the space and the intention for the whole weekend, right? Because if you're having this multi-day event, you want to have that golden thread. You want to have something that makes it cohesive, brings it together. And you want to remind people also that we are between the worlds. I mean, that's half of witchcraft anyway, is that, when we cast our circle or we summon our crossroads or we, lay the compass, these are methodologies to shift our consciousness. We're reminding ourselves that we are no longer solely, anyway, in the physical world, that we are impacting the spiritual world. And, there's many different ways that we could describe that depending on culture or tradition. But just in a nutshell, we are reaffirming, to our, I would say our fetch, to our primal soul, to our subconscious understanding that we are actually in this magical space, between the worlds. And when we affirm that reality to our primal soul, that enables us to be able to tap into those powers in a deeper way. More so than if we're just, stuck in our ego personality, which often will question all the crazy stuff that we're doing, right? Well, that's not real. That's not science, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, it doesn't need to be science. We're focusing, I mean, a little bit of the craft is part science, you want to take notes and you want to figure out, did this work? Did this not work? Right. So that part is science, but it's really, for me anyway, it's mostly art. And inspiration. I'm less of an academic, and I'm more interested in what might be considered like the shamanic core, of certain practices. And so that's kind of more where I am. And trance states are really, for me, it all hinges on that, because when we get into those states of awareness where we're more permeable, we can open up more. We can now enter into a type of usually nonverbal communication, I will say, with the spirits of the land, of the herbs that you're working with, of the stones, your spirit guide, your familiar, whatever. We have to get into a space where we can be receptive and actually listen. And if we're just stuck in the ego, we're not going to hear that. Because the ego is just like, oh, only stuff that's real is the stuff I can touch and the stuff that I can see with my eyes. And we know scientifically the universe is way bigger than that, that our ability to perceive is so limited compared to, just the universe. I mean, if we even just think of just light, we can only see like this. I mean, we call it the visible spectrum for a reason. And if you look at it, it's like, it's this much of this grand thing, infrared or ultraviolet. That's just talk for, that it's almost like that's just the label that we give it because we can't perceive it directly. It's not something that we can actually see. I often wonder, like, what would life be? I just recognized that, like my husband Chaz was telling me, we raise chickens, and apparently chickens have way more light cones in their eyes than humans do. And so they can see more colors than we can see. And that is like tripping me out right now.
Yeah.
I'm like, I want that implant, right? I want to know, what is octarine? I want to be able to see, those colors, but there you go. We're limited, right? But in trance, we can then kind of open up and begin to perceive things outside of our normal perceptual limitations, right? And so that for me is at least part of what trance offers. It gives us an opportunity to start to move beyond our supposed limitations and maybe then enter into concert or allyship, with other spiritual intelligences that can kind of take that reach further. That's one of the things that I think in a lot of occultism, we will work with certain spirits because they can reach farther than we can. In the fairy tradition, we work with the watchers, these kind of, some people call them fallen angels, right? You're getting all sassy about it. But and one of the things in our lore says they invoke that which we cannot, right? So they just have a farther reach.
Yep.
But it's through entering trance, shifting our awareness, because they're always here. The other world is always here. It's part of this world. We just don't focus on it because we wouldn't really be able to get anything done. We'd probably go insane if we were just open to it all the time. That's just too much. I think of, people with autism that have just too much. It's like, you got to calm it down.
Yeah.
And psychically, the same thing can happen if you're too open. You can really just get, so, filtering is also a good thing. That's what a lot of people will focus on, shielding and protection magic. And usually they're kind of, I will say, I don't focus on protection a lot because I feel that there's not a lot that I necessarily have to protect from. I'm not approaching it like it's a big scary thing. And but you want to be safe. You want to be smart about it. And so you do want some level of filter because it's just too much, So, and that was one of the things I remember Lori Cabot would talk about. That's why she said witches wear black, because it's very protective. It's a filtering color. It's a shielding color, and that has worked for me. I feel it's very shielding, and so I will often wear black when I'm doing a lot of my magical work, for that reason.
And we're all
wearing. I'm going off on a tangent.
We're all wearing.
It's a good tangent. It's a good tangent.
This is 100% the tangent I want to be down, because I
Yes.
personally agree. And I want to talk about that protection aspect of it too. There's so many parts I want to pick out all at once. I will just say I very much feel similar, Storm, and I want to hear some more of your thoughts, if you're okay sharing, about that less of a need for protection feel. And why I wanted to have that conversation is I feel similar to what you just said. I'm someone that doesn't approach it like it's scary. That's not to say there's nothing out there that could get you. I know everyone has their own opinions and all of that. But I do come at it from this angle that you're gonna find what you think you're going to find. So if you're sitting at home and you're hyping it up and you're making it scary, I wouldn't be surprised if you contact something scary on the flip side. But I'm also the mindset that if you're going into it like, hey, I want to have a good, enlightened conversation with good intentions, that protection isn't necessarily the route I want to hyper focus on, because I don't want to shield out the stuff I'm actually trying to pull in. So could you maybe share some extra thoughts on that, Storm?
Well, I do think that, one of the things about trance is that like I mentioned before, we become permeable, right? And so on one level, we might look at that, permeability, that means I'm vulnerable, right? And that means that I'm extra susceptible, perhaps, to outside influences. And on one level, that's true. But if that's just the only way you're going to focus on it, that sounds kind of scary, doesn't it? It's like, oh my God, you're really putting yourself at risk. And I'm not here to say you never have to do protection,
right?
And you never have to do grounding or any of that kind of stuff. But I'm saying you don't necessarily have to focus on the protection from a space of fear. It's not that, oh my God, everything out there is out to get me, necessarily. But you do want to be smart about it. So I will kind of think of the reality of what I call astral wildlife, and it's not that they're out there, they're evil. Everybody's got this weird, not everybody, but a lot of people have this idea of like, oh, there's demons and the demons are evil and they're out to eat you and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, I do believe in demons. I've worked with demons, but I don't really feel demons in that way that they're like, oh, just this evil, because that's just, to me, that's so just pedestrian in terms of thought. It's just like, oh, it's good and it's evil. Like there isn't anything else. What's a wild lion?
Right.
Is the wild lion evil? Well, it ran into a village and it ate a kid. Oh, that's terrifying. But is that evil? I mean, the lion was like, yay, easy snack, right? It wasn't like malicious. If you want to talk about evil, you have to talk about humans.
Yes.
Humans are
and
evil.
That is just, come on. And evil, I mean, the idea of evil, I really resonate with the late Victor Anderson. Of course, I will talk about him a lot because he's the late founder of the fairy tradition that I practice and teach. But he had a definition of evil that was simply life force that was twisted, And so if somebody was labeled evil, it wasn't necessarily a moral absolute. It was more of a condition that perhaps could be healed. It was a weakness, it was a sickness, it was a corruption. And so those are things that we wanted to heal. And so there is mythos in fairy tradition that really talks about having compassion even for evil, because it's only through compassion that we could hope to heal something. And you're not going to heal something or somebody if you just have contempt for it. So I kind of approach the universe more as less of, oh, there's like these evil things that are out to get me, but there are dangerous things. But I will say that for the most part, if you're brand new, to witchcraft and to occultism and magic, you're pretty much good. You're not, for the most part, you're not going to bump up against those things. Now, some people have certain innate talents and they're easier to connect with things than others. And so there's always the possibility. So I think being cautious, is a good idea. I think that paying attention to what folklore has told us about certain things. Again, I mentioned being of the fairy tradition, right? It's right there in my name. But a lot of the folklore about fairies is how to avoid them or how to protect yourself from them. And so you want to pay attention to that. I also think part of that is Christian propaganda. Because people say, oh yeah, in the pre-Christian days. Well, you don't really know exactly what was going on in the pre-Christian days because Christianity happened way long time ago, right?
Right.
European pagans were colonized a long time ago. And so there was a lot that was lost. And I do feel that a lot, I mean, not all of it, but a lot of the practices around fairies and avoiding them is really fear-based. And I do feel a lot of that can be traced to the Christian overculture, who's really trying to deter people, from engaging in anything unless it's, Jesus on the cross, right? And so now that isn't to say that, oh no, it's free for all and they're fine and they're always going to help you, and I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is you still want to be cautious, but maybe you don't need to let the fear paralyze you. But you're still going to be cautious because these are still beings you don't know. I wouldn't just, walk into some bar that I've never been in before and just randomly start, talking to people. I mean, I don't know. You want to be like aware. You don't want to like act a fool. I'm not going to go to that bar and just be crazy and like read people's beads or whatever. I don't know them, whatever. I'm going to be opening myself to a lot of, danger perhaps if I'm going to go in there and act like a jerk. So if you're working with the Fae, you probably want to be respectful, right? That's one of the things that really often comes up is if you are going to work with them, then you want to make sure that you are being authentic, that you are being respectful, and that you follow certain prohibitions because they do operate differently, than we do. There's a lot of lore about working with the Fae. Their witchcraft and fairies are inextricably intertwined. In my mind, there is no way to practice witchcraft and not have some relationship with the Fae. Newsflash, you can think you have no relationship with the Fae, and yet you do.
Yes.
If you're working magic, you do. This doesn't necessarily mean the Fae in terms of like, oh, the little people of Ireland. No. That is like one little slice, that culturally has really taken off, whatever. But every culture has had a relationship with what we might call the Fae or the little people. And sometimes they're not so little, sometimes they're giants, right? They're beings of power. Some now today might refer to them as ultra-terrestrials, right? And I do feel like the Fae experience and the UFO experience is really part of the same thing. It's this other world experience, right? It's just now it's like, oh, it's UFOs because now we live in a technologically dominated society. And so that's how we're going to perceive it. But it's permeable. It comes through our lens. And I think, Kyle, you mentioned before talking about like the Ouija board thing. I was thinking, and you were talking more specifically about like, well, if you're approaching it from fear, you're going to kind of get that. You get what you expect, right? And we get what we expect even on a subconscious level, maybe especially on a subconscious level. Because again, like the personality could say, oh, I'm fine. There's nothing. I don't believe in this, whatever. But maybe your subconscious does. You were programmed at an early age and you kind of have these beliefs that you don't even know you have. And so now you're going to use that Ouija board. And now the devil is going to talk to you through the Ouija board, right? To me, that is so obvious that is your shadow.
Yeah.
That is, the first thing that happens when we start working with like psychic development exercises and all that is our shadow comes up. I can't begin to tell you how many people I knew in my youth that when I was first getting into all this and like our group was getting into all this stuff and, whatever, there was a particular friend of mine who literally, it was like every day they were under psychic attack. And they were telling these elaborate stories and how they were being psychically attacked and, all the measures that they were taking in order to protect themselves. And we were all very concerned because, of course, I could see that she was distressed. I could see that the emotions were real and I had no reason to disbelieve her. But after a while, it became like, oh, really? Again? You? Why are you being singled out for this? You who's not really doing anything, whatever. And I do kind of feel like sometimes it is a cry for attention. That's one thing. Also leading events, as I have done, for a lot of people, I've noticed that there's a certain personality type that just screams, look at me and take care of me. And these are the people that if you're doing like heavy trance work, they have trouble coming back. And not to get down on everybody who has trouble coming back, because that can be a legit thing. But that's also a tool sometimes I feel that people use, maybe subconsciously, in order to get attention because they feel like in life they're not getting enough attention. And so you're at this event, you're doing some psychic stuff, and now they're having trouble coming back, and you're trying to lead them back. And now everyone is like, oh, we're helping you come back. And on one level, that must feel really good, right? Because now everyone's paying attention to them. And so at some point, I stopped being so nice about it, and so if somebody is having trouble coming back, then cold water in the face. It works.
Oh, wow.
It's not mean. Here's a towel, whatever. But that's what you get from me now. I'll do a little in the beginning. Let's try to talk you back. If that's not working, cold water in the face, an ice cube down the back. It works every time.
Yep.
And I guarantee you're not going to do that at one of my events in the future. After that, so but that's a thing. I feel again I have gone off on a tangent.
No. Well, we love the tangents.
This is exactly.
I'm like the king of tangents.
Well, but this is where we want to be. You've put together so many interesting threads that we've been unraveling for the past year, but especially the last couple months. When we had Devin Hunter on, we did the ESP workshop with everyone and talked about very similar ideas. Just last week, we interviewed Peter Biebergall, who wrote this great book called Strange Frequencies. And our chat got into this idea of finding a space of enchantment, because Pagan and I are also people that aren't looking to prove one thing or the other. We don't have an answer for folks, but what we do want to do is explore and revel in this mystery and this phenomena. Like you mentioned before, Fae encounters and UFO encounters have a lot of similarity and overlap.
Yeah.
So what does that do for your brain when you can go into this land of enchantment? I think there's so much power in getting yourself to that state. And I'm hoping in our trance session that we put on for Seance Saturday that we can work on something similar. I mean, this is all up to whatever you would like to do with it, Storm. We'll keep chatting about it. But I know for me, one of the intentions I'd love to have is kind of a exposing our chat, our audience to the idea of using trance work to enhance your connectivity out there. Because every Saturday, it's Pagan, myself, and our amazing viewers and listeners that are coming together and just seeing what doors we can knock on and who might respond. Whether it might be a watcher angel type of feel, or it might be what we consider a traditional UFO sort of situation. We're always just looking to see how we can make it a safer experience, a healthier experience, and kind of a more fun exchange. So I hope that kind of also give you a little bit of a setup for it.
I love that you said that it should be fun. You know, I mean, it doesn't always have to be like fun 100% of the time, but in general, it should be fun. It should be something that enlivens us, that enriches us. You know, a lot of time we'll talk about the work, you know, especially in that Crowleyan way, you know, like the work, the capital W work, which I'm totally a fan of. But at the same time, where's the joy? You know, so one of my peers, you know, Karina Blackheart, who's a fairy initiate, and she teaches on the East Coast. She was at one of those fairy camps that I mentioned, and she was talking about, we have this prayer that comes from Victor Anderson about our God soul, you know, what in Blue Rose we call the Holy Daemon, but is often called, you know, the flower spirit or the bird spirits, your higher self. And there is a prayer from Victor called the Flower Prayer, and it goes, "Who is this flower above me? And what is the work of this God? I would know myself in all my parts." And so Karina was talking about that, about how, what is the work of this God? Well, after a while, if you're doing this work a lot, it starts to feel just like that. It feels like work, you know? And if it just feels like work for too long, maybe we need to do something to mix it up, to liven it up a little, because we need to be engaged. You know, we need to find the joy. And so she started experimenting, just changing the language. You know, who is this flower above me? And what is the joy of this God? Knowing full well that it's the same. But if we're approaching it as joy instead of the drudgery of work, suddenly our relationship changes. And that's true magic. That's deep magic right there. That's the magic of poetry. It can change how we feel about a certain thing. You might think, oh, this is absolute. But if we change our perspective, we change how we're describing it, we therefore then change how we feel about it, our relationship to it. We can now see things that we weren't able to see before. We can start to get benefits that we didn't even know were there. And so that's one of the magic, I think, of the craft. You know, Starhawk said that witchcraft is a religion of poetry. You know, and I think a lot of people in the modern age think, oh, well, what good is poetry? You know, poetry is just something ephemeral. Poetry holds our world together.
Yes.
Poetry enables us to describe, and I'm not just talking about stanzas that rhyme, although I personally love that. I know it's a little lowbrow, but I totally love the sing-song rhymey. Probably every interview I give, you know, people ask about how'd you get started in witchcraft? And I always talk about Bewitched, because I was 2 and I was watching episodes of Bewitched. But they would do their spells in that sing-song rhymey, and that's straight up European paganism, by the way, right? European witchcraft is full of rhyming cantrips and spells, and I just love it. I get into that sing-song kind of like, ooh, get the rhythm of it going, and that's where you get the power. You start tapping into the power. So I just love it. But you know, people think, oh well, poetry. What is poetry? You know, it's just something like almost like academic, like it's not going to affect like the real person. And everyone is affected by poetry, and it doesn't have to be just, you know, words. You know, I think that you know dance and art is a type of poetry. It's a way of viewing the world. You know, it's a lens through which we view the world, and it's not literal, because literalism can only take us so far. And not that I'm saying literalism is bad. We need the ego, we need the academic, we need the rational, but we need to also be able to step outside of the rational to be able to perceive a little bit more, of the universe. Again, we have that limited perceptual field, right? And so the visible spectrum now becomes like the metaphor for rational thought, knowing most of the universe is outside of that. And so what do? We have to go outside our comfort zone. We have to go outside of our rational mind, but we must be tethered. We must be able to come back, and we must be able to bring that information back with us in a way that we can actually use. And that's a tricky thing because we're talking about vastly different areas of consciousness. And when you go really deep into that, so I also call the state of enchantment, by the way, that state where we are connected, we're outside of our ego. It's a state of ecstasis, ecstasy. When we're touching so deep, and then we come back from that deep place, often we forget. We're like, what just happened? Oh, I can't remember. It's like when you've had that really deep, intense symbolic dream and you come back, you're like, oh my God, that was amazing. And I have no idea it's gone, right? That's why keeping a dream journal or doing dream work is so important, because it helps to train us to be able to take more and more of that and retain it. When your ego mind is more aligned with your primal mind, your primal soul, then you're going to be that much more likely to be able to bring back that information and first of all, remember it. That's the key. Remembering is one. And then two is, can I put this into motion? Can I actually do something with it?
It's so funny that you were talking about the whole finding joy aspect of and separating that from work. In one of our seances, one of the beings that we connected with has been appropriately named Harold. That's what it calls itself. And at one time, he told us to go find joy. And, in today's world, that's a little difficult. We're not exactly sure how to go about that. Like, what do you mean by joy? Is it the fleeting joy? Like, what joy is it? And so that's very interesting that you put those together, because now it's like, oh, well, maybe we should separate the work parts and seek out the joy and change up what we're asking in that way. So that's really interesting.
It kind of reminds me in its own little way, and I'm not saying it's the same, but it just reminds me of something I read many years ago from Deepak Chopra. And he was talking about the goddesses Lakshmi and Sarasvati. And of course, Lakshmi is basically, in a nutshell, the goddess of wealth and prosperity, abundance, and Sarasvati, the goddess of wisdom, we say. And I'm just distilling that down for the sake of conversation, right? And so he had said, oh, well, if you pursue Lakshmi, so if you pursue wealth, she will elude you. But if you pursue Sarasvati, if you pursue wisdom, Lakshmi will get jealous and then she will pursue you. Which I thought is pretty awesome on one level. On the second level, it's also kind of patriarchal. And I'm just like, what? What's going on? I need to make, women jealous now. But I think, but if you distill it down beyond like the humanized aspect of that, because we're talking about gods, deities, they are not humans. Deities are not role models. They are forces of power, and they can inspire us, but again, they're not role models. We're not going to do what they do. But I did like the idea that, like, oh no, the moral of this story is pursue wisdom. Don't go into it thinking, oh, I need money. Oh yeah, we all need money. We live in a capitalist society.
Yes.
At least still right now. We're not at Star Trek yet, but so pursue wisdom. It's like, do what you love and the money will follow is kind of the adage. And I know it's not as simple as that. But there is an element of truth to that. If you find joy in what you're doing, you can even find joy in the drudgery sometimes, and that could be harder. But if I can find joy in scrubbing a toilet, somebody else can find joy in something just as, icky, whatever, right. Whether it's your horrible job or whatever, there's something you can find joy in. And maybe finding that joy inspires you to get a better job. It's not about just accepting your station. either. I'm not saying that, but there is something to find joy in. Even if it's just, I woke up this morning and I'm able to breathe. I woke up this morning, I looked outside and I could see the trees. That is something that I have joy. I'm going to count my blessings, right? There is something so profound actually about that as a practice, which I know sounds kind of schlocky. It's kind of like, eat, pray, love, whatever, but it's true. If you count your blessings, poetically, you put yourself in that enchanted state where you're going to be able to actually see your blessings and appreciate them. Because I think a lot of life is us just not appreciating, what's going on around us. It reminds me of that little exchange, but the color purple. I think it pisses God off when you walk by the color purple and don't notice, right? So
I love that so much. I love it. It's great.
I kind of want to continue this conversation of joy, especially pagan. I'm so glad you brought that up, because Storm, you have me wondering if when we're getting something through that's telling us to find joy, if in some ways it's even asking us to maybe reevaluate the process of what we're using to connect. Because I would bet pagan and even some of our audience at times felt that well, we were kind of hyper-focused on this Halloween energy and, bringing in all the enchantment of fall, that we were, trying to knock on these doors. And I wonder if it ever felt almost a bit mechanical to them that, every Saturday we were meeting to do this. And when it's coming through and saying, find joy, I do wonder if we were kind of being sent a message of remember to shake it up, remember to change up, that follow that bliss that you have, because that state of enchantment, that state of ecstasy or shifting, becoming malleable in that sense. I wonder if that's where some of that extra magic lies, and it gives me ideas for the future. And I think we're already on that path with having you in, Storm, to talk about trance work and to be talking to folks about getting into that state. So hopefully in that way, we are therefore doing some of the work, just expanding our minds and trying something outside of the every week routine.
And I think just recognizing that joy itself is spiritual, that joy itself is magical, that just enjoying something, even something mundane, is a spiritual experience, because there is no separation between the spiritual and the so-called mundane. Everything is sacred, everything is profane. And, and I think that's a tough thing for a lot of people who were programmed, growing up in a monotheistic society in which a lot of religion is not joy, and I'm not going to get down on all of Christianity, because, there's parts of Christianity that are beautiful, that are healing. Some people are really doing the good work through Christianity. I know some of these people, it's just a shame that like the political machine, like the American mega churches, they're kind of like the evil corruption, within Christianity, and they have to work that out on their own. Witches can't help them with that. But I think that just enjoying, whatever it is, again, it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be overtly pagan. It doesn't have to be occult. I love Star Trek.
Yes.
Star Trek brings me joy. I will always, bring Star Trek references into what I'm doing. That is a way to have a vision of the future, a positive vision of the future, and I think that's so necessary, that we have to have that vision. We have to have that dream that we could be better, and to see it in action. And I think that Star Trek has brought that. Star Trek is famous for having liberal values, despite what some people on Twitter, will say. But it's something that brings a lot of people joy. And so that can become part of your religious mythos, right? And it's just as serious as if you were using ancient myths, because Star Trek is just a modern myth, because that's what myths are. They're stories that speak to the soul. That's it. One of the goddesses that I work with is Wonder Woman. I've been a devotee of Wonder Woman since I was 4. I have to check the math. When did the TV show come out? In the 70s. I was there because, I'm, old as the hills now, in terms of, in the gay world, I'm ancient. And so I remember I was there, but yeah, she's a legitimate goddess. I feel that, and I've written on this before, she is the goddess Diana, but in the modern age, and she has new stories and, new things to contemplate. But it's just as real as anybody working with like the Morrigan or Hecate or Isis or whoever. It doesn't matter that, oh, this was an ancient culture and this was, somebody making a comic book. What exactly is the difference? There isn't really a difference. And a lot of the old classical mythos, that we read, that was redone. A lot of it for political reasons. A lot of it was done for entertainment. It was plays, and things. It was the same thing. They just didn't have TV. That was their TV.
Yeah.
And yet these are stories that stand the test of time and that speak to people, their soul. I'll say again, Wonder Woman, there's some really good stories there that really speak about deep, important issues of the soul. Compassion is often something that comes up in those stories. So I want to say to all of your listeners, if you haven't considered comic books as a source of legitimate spiritual wisdom, guess what? You have a whole world that's waiting for you, that can be open for you. And if you feel a little silly about it, that's okay. One of my lessons is to help people become more comfortable with silly. I think silly is so powerful because once we accept silly, we really get out of our heads. We're no longer concerned with how do I look? We're so usually concerned, I would say just in gay male world, we're so concerned with like, oh, how do I look? And I want to present right and whatever. And, but if you're silly, it's like all bets are off. You're not trying to impress anybody, not even yourself. You're just having a good time. And that's when I think the magic actually happens. That's when we're actually able to touch something deeper because we're no longer confined by our ego. All that ego chatter that's telling us we have to edit ourselves and be presentable and be taken seriously. There was somebody on, I don't know, probably I'll just blame Twitter. It was probably Facebook though. But somebody had said, I don't know, I wrote an article and somebody shared it and somebody said, oh, well, with a name like Storm Faerywolf, I just can't take him seriously.
Yeah.
And I thought,
I remember that.
why do you think that I'm trying to get you to take me seriously? I mean, what about me, says I want your approval? Sure, I think I did, like at one point, I wanted people to like me. We all want people to like us, but at some point that becomes too much work and it becomes the antithesis of our inner work. And so at some point, it's like, you just have to let that go. So, taking my name, Storm Faerywolf, which on one level it's ridiculous. I get it. Depending on how you look at it, it could be absurd. For me, it's actually a deeply spiritual conviction. And so I don't necessarily see it as silly, but I can see where others will, and I enjoy that too. Part of it was also I thought, oh, with a name like Storm Faerywolf, it's going to be hilarious when I'm like 85. I could just imagine being 85 years old and just being an old gay guy named Storm Faerywolf. I just think that's kind of crazy and laughable and delightful. So that was part of it too. I do talk a little bit more about how my name came about in my next book coming out, which is The Witch's Name, because I have 2 books coming out. Yes. One in March and one in May. And but yeah, I talk about how I became, Storm Faerywolf. And it's it was a legit series of experiences. And I have this name to remind me of those experiences and to remind me that I've made a pledge to kind of stand outside normal society, that I am a warlock full time. I'm here to do that work, not just on Instagram, not just on, Fridays in front of my altar or whatever, or at a coven meeting, but every single day. I'm Storm Faerywolf every day. I get mail to Storm Faerywolf. I get bills to Storm Faerywolf, because that's the name that I use. There's also another permutation of my legal name that I've used for, other stuff. But for the most part, and everybody just knows me as Storm. That's just how that works. Because that is a powerful spell that I cast upon myself to shift my consciousness. I made a choice to leave my birth name, which I felt was never really mine. I was named after my father. My father and I don't really get along. We haven't spoken in many years. I wish him no ill, but we're not really, we're not friends. And but I always felt like that was his name. That wasn't my name. And so all my life, I was kind of on a journey to find my true name, and eventually I did. And of course, that's my public name. I have other names for, certain traditions that I've been initiated into. I have, a secret name that's just known to me and the gods, so there's different things. And I talk all about that kind of process in my next upcoming book, The Witch's Name, from Llewellyn Books. So
we need to talk
shameless
about
plug.
Yeah, please plug away, because that is what I was going to segue into anyway. So The Witch's Name, we got that for a March release date. Is that right, Storm?
Yeah. So, supply chains notwithstanding, because I know that actually has affected the publishing industry. So there are a lot of books that are coming out late. So I was told that I will know as soon as they know, but everything looks good right now for it looks like March 8th is the release date for The Witch's Name. And then I have The Satyr's Kiss, which is coming out May of 2022. So it's going to be a interesting couple months there. Boom, boom.
A couple months, but a good couple of months.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I don't think I'm ever going to do it again, having two books at the same time. That's what I did on my pandemic lockdown, was write two books. And I got delayed, of course, because we had a brick and mortar store that was actually there for 30 years, more than 30 years. And we had to close it in June of 2020 because of COVID. And because we knew there's no way we're coming back from this anytime soon.
Right.
The rent was astronomical as it was, and if I wasn't doing any business, there was no way I was going to be able to pay that. So we made the decision to close. It was actually the best decision I think we ever made.
Oh, really? Good.
It was it was actually really, really nice. We've been able to kind of pull things back. We rebranded. Yeah. The old store was the Mystic Dream, so we let that branding go, and now we're Datura Trading Company, and we've included plants, as you can see behind me. There's a whole bunch of plants, and this is such a small selection. The rest of my house is a jungle, but we sell exotic plants. We're part of the Save Our Species program, which means that we're actually raising plants that are endangered in the wild, and so to kind of help make sure that the species don't die out. So we're really happy to be participating in that. But I just love plants. I grew up with a lot of plants. And I love the feeling of like being in a forest, and it really kind of lifts everything up. Just having some houseplants, it's that life force. It brings that cleanliness, that life force, that joy. For me, it's one of the ways that I'm able to tap into joy is just being around greenery. It does just kind of cleanse my soul. And if I can't go anywhere, because we're still on lockdown, I have to be extra careful. My mother has some health concerns, and I'm the one who lives closest. And so I'm still not really seeing people if I can avoid it. Yep. I barely go to the grocery store, but, so I can't go. I would go on these writer retreats. We'd go to the Russian River like every May, whatever. And I'd be out in the redwoods. We would rent this house that was like right on the creek and had a hot tub. And I'd be in the hot tub, and then if I wasn't in the hot tub, I'd be writing, and it's surrounded by the redwoods and everything. And that's how I renewed my soul. And of course I can't do that right now. And so, but we've been putting a lot of effort, obviously, into filling up the house with plants, and we've been selling plants and, tending our trees. We've got a lot of trees on our property for living in the suburbs. It's kind of crazy. But it's like having the retreat here with me. So I feel very blessed. We're back to that lesson, right? Count your blessings. I wake up in the morning, look out my window, and I can see my trees, and I can see the chickens, and I can see the flowers, and it really does bring me that joy. And so I feel very blessed.
I am so happy to hear that. I'm very happy to hear that the closing of the Mystic Dream store, physical brick and mortar, was a positive change too. Because during the pandemic, I mean, that stuff hits so close to home, and so many people, setting up those many-year businesses like that. But seeing you transition into Datura Trading is really awesome, because we saw Devin tweet about it for a while, gathering all those plants during the pandemic, and then the announcement that, hey, we're actually going to be selling and doing all of this. I have one of the Ouija boards behind me from Chaz on the mantle that people have seen me whip out and use before. So really, really great stuff at Datura Trading. I put a a link in chat.
thank
We're going
you.
to make sure we get that out to our members. Now,
Thank
Storm,
you. Thank you very much.
we're kind of reaching our time limit on the main episode here today. If you've got a little bit left in your agenda, in your schedule, we'd love to record a little bonus thing for our members here towards the end, because we can go,
Oh, absolutely.
awesome. We can go a little bit deeper in
Yeah,
some of
yeah.
these books, maybe talk a little bit more about the witch's name, talk about the Satyr's kiss a little bit further. But ultimately, I mean, I love the tangents you brought up. Like,
Yes.
you just took us so spot on in the direction I wanted to be anyway, without
Well,
knowing it.
I feel so fortunate that you feel that way. So thank you.
Anytime.
I also want to pick your brain about a theory that I have. Well, actually, it's my husband's theory
Ooh,
about
okay.
writers and how we actually inspire mythologies. So,
Oh gosh, yeah. Oh, I have some things to say.
Ooh,
Yes,
that's
I
good.
do.
I like it.
Yes.
Okay, so here's what we'll do. We're gonna, everyone that's listening to this on the podcast feed, we are going to close this out. To people that are watching us live on YouTube, I will just run a little end screen, but we're gonna stay around. To the people in this call, we can all get up and take a 5-minute break if you'd like. Get up, stretch your legs. But again, to those that are listening at home on the podcast, make sure you go. You can pre-order Storm's books now. The Witch's Name, Crafting Identities of Magical Power. Also, The Satyr's Kiss, Queer Men, Sex Magic, and Modern Witchcraft. Go pre-order those. March and May release, respectively. Storm, this has been an absolute blast having you on for this. And thank you so much for chatting with us in a few minutes. Members out there, go listen to your bonus feed now. Go subscribe to Storm. Twitter. Yes. Storm, where are all you active? You got your Twitter account where we talk a lot.
Twitter's
Instagram?
my preferred. A little bit on Instagram. I don't do a lot on Instagram. I have I don't really like Zuckerberg.
Same.
And so I'm not so much on Instagram, not so much on Facebook, but I am on those places because you kind of have to be to some degree.
Yes.
But Twitter's my favorite. I'm on Twitter. I technically have a TikTok account. I've posted nothing. I will just watch. I just watch funny videos. I'm not there. I'm not there for witch talk. I'm there for like funny comedians and whatever. Again, finding that joy where you can get it, right?
Yeah.
But Twitter is where I'm at mostly. Yeah, I would say find me on Twitter. Storm Faerywolf.
That's right.
Storm Faerywolf on Twitter.
Go find Storm on Twitter, tweet at him about Star Trek things. My favorite thing to do is guess which episode you guys are re-binging at the time based on like a vague something you'll put out there. And I'm like, I know, this is Voyager Season 4. So
I love it.
Love that.
That's my joy right there, everybody. Storm, thank you again. Everyone out there in chat, thank you for joining us. We will be back in just a minute with the bonus episode. Look forward to Storm coming by our live show on November 20th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, twitch.tv/Kyle Paranormal. Be ready to get into a trance state and find that enchantment, everyone. We will talk to you soon. Stay safe out there. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Okay, everybody in the YouTube feed, we will go ahead and put a little break in here so we can all get up, stretch our legs. I will be back in about 5 minutes.